Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Rock and Roll, an enrollment marketing podcast created by Vision Point Marketing. We are so happy you are joining us. I am Katie Campbell, the Chief Client Officer here at Vision Point, and I am joined by several of my colleagues and so excited to have some first-time rock and rollers on here. To start, we have Alli Hutchinson, one of our graphic production designers, Brooke Brennan, our project manager, and Emma Provost, a media coordinator. Today, we're going to be exploring some current Gen Z trends and not only trying to help us understand what these things are and what they mean, but their implications for higher ed marketing and admissions professionals. Why should this matter to us? Why do we need to know all of these things and how quickly they change? Some of the topics we're going to cover today, though, we'll hit on Brat Summer and how that's quickly switched to Demure. We'll talk about the importance of needing to jump on these trends as quickly as they come out or lean in when they seem to have some staying power. We'll also talk through underconsumption, the Y2K revival, why this is so critical to our audiences, and even share some examples of schools that have really been doing this well, some that we'd recommend everyone go look at after this podcast. So to start, I think it's probably just helpful to define Gen Z a little bit because I think for so long, institutions looked at Gen Z as our traditional high school students. But when we're thinking of the Gen Z age range, that is people born between 1997 and 2012. So what that is looking like for us right now is not just your traditional high school students and traditional undergrads, but very much so your non-traditional learners, your grad students, your soon-to-be doctoral students. So it's as we're thinking about Gen Z, I'm curious, just Brooke, Alli, Emma, things that come to mind, just like notes around this generation, not just before we get into trends, anything that you all would want to offer as to just kind of definitions of this generation as it's evolved.
I can get us started. I feel like it's going to be a generation that's incredibly casual and certainly seeks out authentic media. So part of the reason why we're seeing channels like TikTok and Reels just be so popular, I think is just this interest in calling it how it is, not being overly advertised to, and being on channels where there is an opportunity for some humor. That's definitely what comes to mind for me right off the bat.
I think it's important to make sure our advertising isn't seeming too much like an ad. And I think ads that perform the best are ones that generally try the least.
I think, Alli, kind of in that mindset, it's almost this idea of Gen Z is probably the most self-aware generation in terms of they know when they're being advertised to or they know when they're being marketed to. I was watching TikToks from, I think it was like the Love Island reunion. And so clearly when these cast members are all together, they have giant Pizza Hut boxes and that they're clearly like lifting up in the perfect set to promote that product versus I feel like 10 years ago, it was a little more subtle, or at least we were less aware that it was happening all the time.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like because Gen Z grew up and is currently still in such a technology stage, all of them are expecting their advertisements to kind of be at that same level as them, and they can kind of pick at them very quickly. I think they can really pick it apart really quickly if it's not structured to be very seamless in their feed or whatever they're looking at. And I think that also transfers to higher ed too. I feel like when students are doing anything when it comes to social media or even just being online with their higher ed institution, they expect universities to have those same high tech products and solutions for them, whether it's ads or it's just anything that they're using.
So true. It's one of those things that I do think is a little bit of a generational divide, to your point, Emma, around some generations when they see really personalized ads, it's almost this idea, and not just generations, but some people, when they see those really personalized ads, it's almost like time out. This is creepy. How did they know I just said this? Versus I feel like more and more so people who have been so accustomed to technology being a part of their everyday life for their whole life are almost grateful for the personalization. It's like, that is the exact shoe I've been looking for. Thank you so much. Now I can go get it. It's such a comfortability difference.
I feel like it's this appreciation for the right kind of advertising and ensuring that that advertising works for you. I feel like that's what Gen Z is really looking for. Like they recognize it's going to be an everyday part of their life. And if they're not getting something out of that, and if there's not this kind of like symbiotic, transactional relationship in a positive way, they're going to be labeling it as cringy, and they're really not going to be interested in your advertising, which is why I think, we talk about TikTok sounds and having that humor in these channels and in these mediums is so beneficial, because a Gen Z prospect is going to see that and actually start to look at a brand and think of it as having personality and having, vulnerability and dimensions and all of the things that a Gen Z prospect is really going to hold in high regards.
Yeah, no, absolutely love that, Brooke. And I think it's an interesting thing too, as a proud millennial. I came from the day of like, when you got home from a night out or a weekend wrap, you would upload approximately 140 to 200 photos of every angle that was ever taken on this digital camera, with no understanding that what you put on the internet would last forever, because it was still so new. And now it feels so much more curated. It's like, nope, here's the one, I think just this week, Instagram is now getting up to 20 that you can do within the carousel. But, here's the 1 to 10 to 20 photos that are going to represent not just this weekend, but actually this entire year so far, this entire month so far. It's a more curated reel or experience that I think we all kind of gravitate towards, and use to not only like package ourselves, but that's also from a brand perspective. Yeah, so I'm really excited to get into this. Now, before we talk about specific trends, I'd be curious to your all's perspective, just as people who work in higher ed marketing 40 plus hours a week and think about prospective students of, not only four-year schools, but community colleges and grad programs for all of our different client partners. I'm curious to why you all would say this matters. Why should a higher ed marketer be familiar with these things? Why should they be thinking about how their brand matches up to current trends?
Yeah, I think that a really big part of student experience is social media, but I think that starts before they enroll or they decide to go to a school. I think that a lot of prospective students that are looking to visit a school or to possibly submit an application to a school are really searching for information about a school online, and that's turned to social media first. Regardless of looking on a higher ed institution's website, they're really starting on their social media accounts and on different student social media accounts that also go to that school or represent that school in some way. So I think trends are really important to stay relevant with that community, especially as they're searching you and seeing if you're up to date and if you're active in that way.
Yeah, I completely agree, Emma. And I feel like so much of this is meeting the prospect, meeting the student where they are. And during that phase of looking for a school, I feel like they are so desperately going to channels and just trying to get an understanding of what the institution is like what life would be like there, what the personality is. And I think this is such a great opportunity to show that personality, and show the effort of also, again, meeting the student where they are and still showing them who you are. And I also feel like as we talk about Gen Z, it's so funny because we will be talking about the two trends of like Brat Summer and Demure. And I honestly feel like the Gen Z personality is both of those things combined. Like very brat and unapologetic and all of these things, and then also very demure, very very mindful in so many ways, and so since so often it's going to be the generation that's using the medium or the platform most that's going to push the trends, I feel like it's such a great way to get a peek behind the curtain and see what they're actually looking for, and what they'll respond to and really engage with.
Yeah, I think often websites are so curated and the photography is, how the university wants to be portrayed. But when you go into an app like TikTok, you're able to find that authentic content and maybe a student who is currently enrolled at the university and what their perspective is. And I also think it's important for, universities or any brand out there to not take themselves too seriously. And I know that can be difficult sometimes in the higher ed space, but that is something that attracts the Gen Z population.
Such a good point, Allie. Like, it's a generation that can so clearly see through, too much polish or it's too perfect. And I think it's more and more so we see brands be successful if they are more transparent, more genuine, more authentic, more, recognized more frequently. Things like sustainability, mental health, like just sometimes the not so pretty. And I feel like that's kind of is a good lead into not everything needing to be so perfect. Coming, as I mentioned, coming from a millennial trend of like clean girl aesthetic, or that being such the trend for so many years. I'd love to get into Brat Summer, and I don't know if anyone wants to take the first stab at trying to describe the origins and definition of what Brat Summer is.
I could certainly try, but
Give it a go, Brooke.
I'm an older Gen Z. Okay. So Emma, Allie, Katie, definitely jump in here with any more context, but I think Brat originated from Charlie XCX's sixth studio album. So Brat that came out. And I think, just the music, and then I think the trends really snowballed from there. And this whole idea that, Brat Summer is going to be where you're unapologetically confident. You're maybe a little bit chaotic in that you're vulnerable, you're who you are. And sometimes that creates a little bit of messiness because we are all human. So it's kind of a complete departure from the clean girl aesthetic. And instead just really leaning into like, okay, we're not taking any time to be clean here. We're just going to be who we are, continue with our fun summer agenda, and everything that entails. But what am I missing here? I mean, I know there's so many facets of this very, very important trend here.
Yeah, I think that the summer definitely like added to this trend. I think that a lot of people are obviously traveling or more free during the summer, and the vibrance of summer in general, like just like it being lighter out later at night, like things like that just kind of I think added to the trend and like the tide that it took. But yeah, Brat basically just like personifies being like unbothered and being like true to yourself. And I feel like that can translate in different ways for a lot of people. So it is a little bit broad, but it is just kind of like doing what you want to do at the end of the day. But yeah, Charlie XCX basically like just kind of like pushed for this to just like be accepted amongst her audience. Like she really didn't have to do much. She just kind of called upon them. And, them being chronically online, it was very easy for them to like actively participate and kind of take on and personify like their own version of it. And obviously that just like takes off on social media as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the main things being used from Charlie XCX's new album is the song 360, which I know blew up on TikTok. And like one of the main lines is, "I'm everywhere, I'm so Julia," which she's referring to Julia Fox, and just being an icon overall. And then of course the chartreuse color that you're now seeing like everywhere. I think like even places like Taco Bell are picking up and using it. It's definitely the color of summer 2024.
Oh, so true. I know. I thank you all so much. I feel like you have to describe that like you're describing it to your parents or your grandparents or whoever it might be. And I don't know about you all, but I've definitely gotten that call from relatives that it's like, "You're in marketing. What is Brat Summer? Like, please describe this to me." But it is very much, I definitely see that very individualized embodiment of that kind of like unbothered, unapologetic, this sense of just not brat with any negative connotation, brat with a very like self-aware, confident connotation, which is kind of a nice change. And even thinking of, talking about a brand who's really embraced it with, just viewing it simply from a marketing perspective. I mean, you go to Kamala Harris's Twitter page, Kamala HQ is Alli, to your point, chartreuse screen, like digital text almost. That is their top banner. I'm curious if, whether it's within Kamala's brand and her campaign or with any other brands you all have seen really embrace it well.
Well, I think part of the reason why Kamala has been so successful in adopting it is it's kind of, reclaiming the messy parts of ourselves. And I think it's the whole thing of no one can call you a brat if you're calling yourself a brat and if you're being authentically you. And what's really interesting about a lot of that campaign is taking maybe some of the more quote unquote embarrassing or cringy parts of Kamala in the public light and basically taking that and putting the spin on it. So I know, I think her laugh specifically is something that had been previously scrutinized, and now that's in a lot of the audios. And then same thing with like coconuts and everything. So maybe taking these parts of ourselves that aren't necessarily camera ready, and taking the control back and saying, nope, this is intentional, and it's Brat Summer.
Yeah, and just like Alli was saying before, like in a lot of political campaigns, it's similar to the seriousness and the polished look. So kind of in the same vein that higher ed is with like polished and like perfect website or photography or ads. So being able to use trends to their advantage for campaigns like that, I think does make them stand out. And again, like attracts that Gen Z audience that is curious and is usually more active and willing to voice their opinion and be heard. So that can really tie them in when, they are interested in politics or they're just interested in general in trends.
Especially in the higher ed space, I think there's a lot of room there to get that relatability, and it kind of wows the audience more than if it's coming from like Duolingo or like one of those Wendy's, like a brand that's already has that relatability in the social media space.
I think that's a great point, Alli. Like you have certain brands that almost are in that Joker archetype, Old Spice, Duolingo. And then you do have other brands that live within, whether that's like the Neighbor or the Sage, thinking of a brand archetype wheel. And when those brands find a way to embrace a more trendy of the moment thing, like Brat Summer, I think it is very attention getting, and you can still do that and be genuine to your brand. That doesn't mean you are now Wendy's and have to tweet at every, negative comment that comes your way, but there's a way to do that and still be your institution or your brand. I'm curious to then, how did we get from Brat Summer to like Demure, which I feel like has now taken over my feed of the last 2 weeks?
So demure has obviously been a word in the English language for probably hundreds of years, but there is a creator on TikTok who started using it differently, and I think the way she even uses the word and uses it with mindful and cutesy is captivating to people, and for some reason this is just one of those trends that has taken off. I know University of Wyoming has jumped on that trend with different things you can do on their campus and how to be demure as a student, and things that are not very demure and not very mindful.
It is this like, if I'm remembering the original video I think I saw, was she was talking about how she does her makeup for work, and it was like no winged eyeliner, very demure, very mindful. And now it just feels everywhere, and it's not anti-brat, but it feels so different than the long-standing trend of summer. Emma, Brooke, curious to your all thoughts.
Yeah, it's like it's not anti-brat. It's like Brat's like friend. It's like Brat's like little sister maybe. Like it's very like mindful is the word I keep using because it's like mindful of others, like mindful of how they're like living their life, how they are being brat, while I am also being demure and mindful of them. So it's kind of like being self-aware. And we were talking about how with Brat, like you're still self-aware, but it's like unapologetically for yourself. I feel like demure is almost like making a show of the fact that you're being mindful of like other people and like how you act like around them, and like making sure like other people are happy, like while you're also being calm. Like it's very like it's not anti-brat, it's definitely like the opposite when it comes to like actions, but I think it's still similar in some ways for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say like Brat may every so often be demure, but that's not the goal. So Emma, I loved how you said like demure is Brat's little sister or friend. I think that's so true. And I feel like these Brat and Demure, I think, are also a great contrast against each other. Like, I think that's something we're starting to see, this emergence of really comparing the two trends. So what would it look like if you had a Brat summer versus a Demure summer? Or I've even started to see things about, you know, Demure potentially extending into fall, because Demure really does more so align with the fall aesthetic that we so often see. And I think that there's a really interesting opportunity for both, but you know, I think of Demure as like a great starting point for that more buttoned up brand. And while I think there's also still a huge opportunity to lean into Brat and to just, you know, be unapologetically confident like the trend suggests, I think we're starting to see, you know, even more brands potentially jumping on Demure, since there's such an easy opportunity to show those ways. And even in higher ed, it's like, you know, could you be demure with your fall deadlines or with your application deadlines, and, you know, how much time you're giving prospects? I think that there's such opportunity with that, in that so many brands are already practicing being demure. And now, to Emma's point, like it's highlighting what you're doing to be conscious and self-aware, like we see is a trait of Gen Z.
It makes you almost think of even just like content opportunities. If you were to show, Emma, you mentioned seeing like campus tours, and when people are on those, they want really the true experience. And Alli, to your point, like seeing beyond the website, you think of, you know, could you show a Brat dorm room versus a Demure dorm room? Or, you know, it's many different ways to go about it. I'm curious to your all's thoughts too on, you know, even just recording this podcast now, when this comes out in a couple of days, who even knows if Demure will still be a thing, whereas Brat seems to have had a little bit of staying power. I'm curious to your all's thoughts as to if brands should jump on these, even though they seem to come and go so quickly, or the pros and cons of adopting these trends as fast as they come out.
Yeah, I think that is so tough because a lot of trends do have a short lifespan. So you have to jump in while the audience is still perceiving it as a trend and as relevant and as fun and as cool. I think that if you see that a trend is already dying out, it's probably best not to join in, because I feel like if you put out, you know, like poorly executed or like late content, that's when it kind of flips on your head and you become like out of touch or inauthentic, or you're trying too hard. So it's such a tough timeline. And it's really difficult to navigate, especially as they switch really quickly. I think with something like Brat Summer, it's definitely been adopted as more of a lifestyle, and it's taken like its own form. So you can see that it's a little bit more malleable when it comes to like creating content that fits for you. Demure could happen that way, especially like Brooke was saying, like if it extends into fall. I think that a lot of sound bites, like particularly on TikTok, but in general, those are usually a little bit more fleeting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with how quickly the trends evolve and really move, it's all about hitting it with the right timing. And to Emma's point, hopefully not too late. So I think as these sound bites and trends come out, it's more about understanding the trend than getting it perfect. And I don't think it's, you know, understanding it 100% where you're like, okay, I live, breathe, eat Brat. I think it's more so just understanding, okay, what is the goal of Brat? What is Brat really trying to say? And what are some opportunities that we can relate that to our institution? And finding that niche and opportunity and then really acting on it. Because I think to Emma's point, if you're not doing that and if you're not taking the risk, then it's just going to appear inauthentic when you're doing it kind of like months after it's gone, and that's almost gonna backfire a bit.
I think also because these trends are often so fleeting and maybe gone in like a week, it pushes brands to be quick with it, and you don't have a lot of time to perfect an ad and make sure it's super polished and everything. And I think that's even better for the Gen Z audience because it's just ties in that authenticity again.
No, such great points. And it is interesting. It's almost like I feel like there's a little bit of a difference between a soundbite trend. Those tend to go in and out so quickly because then the next sound is here versus a almost more personality-based trend, maybe aesthetically based trend. Brat Summer is a great example where it's had a little bit of staying power. Some of the other ones that more so seem to speak to like Gen Z's mentality and less about like a one-off soundbite are things like underconsumption or even the Y2K revival. These things seem to have been around for weeks, months, and not just based in like one creator's video that's been adopted, but more so a lifestyle or mentality. So maybe we could start with underconsumption. I'm curious to your all thoughts on that trend, what it kind of means to you or how you've seen it represented, and also how you think maybe higher ed marketers could leverage it.
Yeah, I mean, with underconsumption, I think that's really just finding new use in something old. And I mean, it's very self-explanatory with that one, I think, especially. So I think that underconsumption specifically, I've seen it used in funny ways, where people are talking about like even their long-standing relationships being a sign of underconsumption, or maybe more literal underconsumption, pointing to sustainability or kind of, bringing back vintage items. So I think that that's always a great way to be more literal and highlight sustainability practices, or maybe find a funnier opportunity to highlight underconsumption, whether it be in some way through the lens of retention or different ways that an institution is under consuming.
And I think to your point, not every trend has to be a series of videos or content that you create. Sometimes it can just be like one caption here or notes, design elements. Thinking also like in that Y2K space, I feel like every generation is always nostalgic for a time that they weren't even alive for, several decades ago. And it's been interesting watching Gen Z really bring back so much of the like early 2000s trends that we're kind of right at the tip of them, taking over. And I feel like that would be a trend that's hard to say like, and here's our Y2K video, and here's how we are doing Y2K. It feels like it's more so small elements. Curious to how you all think maybe colleges and institutions and universities could even bring in some of the Y2K pieces that Gen Z seems to be so attracted to.
No, I do feel like that's such a good point. And I think, Katie, as you mentioned, bringing in smaller elements, I feel like so much of connecting and engaging with your audience is going to be showing that you're literate of the trends going on and that you're aware of the trends going on and being able to relate in that way. So I know, one way that you could bring in the Y2K is more so brand elements. And I'm sure Alli would have much more to say here, but just bringing in like all of those beautiful Y2K fonts or just design that's going to point more towards that era. Because I think, Katie, as you kind of mentioned, that is one that is harder to emulate, where you're of course not going to be like, look how Y2K of us. It's more so just kind of leaning into it and showing different signs of adopting it and kind of fitting in with the overall aesthetic.
I love that, Brooke. And that is true with branding. There are different ways we can bring in that kind of aesthetic, but outside of brand elements, I think another great way to kind of hint at the Y2K revival is through sounds, especially on TikTok. I've noticed over the past maybe year or so, you see a resurgence of these like sped up songs from the early 2000s. And I think hopping on those, even just adding those sounds will be more in that aesthetic.
Yeah, it's so true. It's not like you need to have, the Duolingo mascot or something like even necessarily the like bright green. There even are small things like just leveraging free sounds on TikTok or Instagram Reels that you can then start to show a little bit of awareness and lean into the trendiness that these things bring. I think so frequently us as marketers read research and see reports and talk to users. And so frequently, especially in the last 5-10 years, it's been shorter and shorter attention spans, right? We watched commercials go from a minute to 30 seconds to 15 seconds to 6 seconds. I feel like recently on TikTok, I've been seeing a lot of creators actually go from like 6 seconds to using the 1 minute format or even creating a series of 1 minute videos. I'm curious to your all's thoughts as to how do those two things coexist? How does, all the research show us that attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, yet there seems to be some people who can really hit the mark with creating almost short series or longer form content. I'm curious to, even from a personal note, if those things appeal to you all.
I was definitely tuned in for the Who Did I Marry 52 part series, which I think comes out to be like 7 hours or something crazy. And I finished it in probably just a few days. I think what she did that drew people in was she was so real and so authentic with her story. And you could tell it was not trying to hide anything, not trying to cover anything up, but just telling this slightly embarrassing story of what happened to her. I think often with stories like that, cutting them into parts is beneficial just because people can tune back in and it's not like a 1 hour TikTok that they have to watch all at once.
We love episodes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like I remember a trend of, I don't remember exactly, it might have been Universal, um, cutting up the entire Mean Girls movie and putting it on TikTok and like, because people do that like not in the correct way, like pirating movies in a sense, but it's funny to see like a brand that does, create movies and has the correct rights for them being able to literally like break them up on TikTok and be like, here's a movie like in 3 minute segments or whatever. So stuff like that is really interesting. And then we go back to like the underconsumption trend, and it's like that's ironic if we think about over consuming media at the same time. That's kind of where the drawback is. Like I'm under consuming like in my life, in my day to day with materials. But when it comes to media, I feel like a lot of people are over consuming and they are constantly wanting more. I think, Katie, you mentioned earlier that there's the Instagram carousels are up to 20 now. So it's like people are wanting more. And I think it's funny that the attention span is still short, but it's just the want of like more media to come in and fill in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about even in my own personal life, like I don't really watch movies anymore. And I think that's one sign of the attention span. Like we see TV shows are so incredibly popular over movies right now. But then when I think about it, I can sit down and watch 2 to 3, sometimes even 4 on a crazy night TV shows. And it's like I'm watching 2 movies. So I'm over consuming media, but just under consuming in that format. And I feel like that's such an interesting intersection of our culture. And I think more so on the TikTok format and Instagram Reels, I feel like a lot of it goes down to trust. And I think there's still a huge opportunity where Gen Z is going to appreciate captivating stories and storytelling in general, kind of like what Alli hit on. Like if it's a captivating story, you can absolutely still suck us in that ongoing format. And I think beyond that, I think there is an emergence of appreciation for longer form videos, especially from someone that you trust and that you feel like kind of fits in with your ideals or is particularly funny. I think we're starting to see more of like the Get Ready With Me is kind of back, and some of those videos where it is a little bit longer and more to watch there.
Yeah, it is. I feel like every generation is a little bit of a walking contradiction, right? And maybe this is one of the Gen Z ways, as to your all's point. It's a desire for underconsumption, but for more of the things that are specific or personal or connect with you. So there's space for short form, very quick 6-second videos, sounds that we really want to lean into and see, but we want to see them at volume while also at more so from a quality perspective, being open to a 7-hour 20-part series that we're all captivated by. Well, thank you all so much for joining for this and explaining some trends. If you all are down for it, we can end with a little rapid fire. So just 3 quick questions for you to get a better understanding of who our guests are, but also maybe you can share some of your favorites here. I'd be curious if we could go around for what is the most used app on your phone?
Mine is definitely TikTok. Personal goal to limit that.
I think so. I think between YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels, like there are so many short form video options, and not that it's looking like it is going away, but just in case we have backups.
Yeah, I think mine is Instagram, but I would have to check.
Like check the screen time.
Yeah, literally. I think it's Instagram though.
Definitely don't want to check my screen time. Mine is Instagram. It used to be TikTok, but then I deleted TikTok because I just couldn't handle it. So I was
Me
like,
too.
well,
Me too.
I'm getting the reels a couple weeks late. Maybe it'll limit my viewership, and it has not. So, but that's just where I'm at.
We're
I am getting
detoxing.
to that point. It's the algorithm. It just shows this kind of the same videos over and over for me.
Yeah. We're
I
good.
had I had to delete TikTok because it was affecting me. So, but I just checked my screen time. It's actually YouTube, but I like watch a lot of podcasts, like the video version. So I feel like that's kind of where that plays in as well.
Throwing it off. Yeah. No, absolutely. It's like you detox and then you find an alternate. It's like,
Yeah.
okay. And then something will bring you back. Like someone will text you a TikTok video and you're like, I guess I have to re-download it. I'm curious too, what is one of your favorite TikTok trends or noises? Like even if it's not current, like historically from the last little bit, favorite TikTok trend or noise?
I don't know the name of the song, but I like the song that's like, who can say what
Oh,
because it's always like someone falling like in like slow motion or like something going wrong. I don't know the name of the song. Someone has
I,
to, but I just saw one recently that was really funny, so that's why that one came to mind.
I love that we got Emma karaoke just for that.
It's kind of old too. It's like not recent, but I think
A
it's fun.
classic.
I'm gonna pick one of our current trends. I really do love Demure. I was like, it'll be Demure fall. I like want to hold on to it. I mean, I actually am kind of already starting to be sick of it, but I love the purpose behind it. And I've also unfortunately started adopting it at work where I'm like, "Ah, so Demure, thank you," or trying to be Demure here. Just getting agendas together as us project managers do. So you all work with me. I'm sure you'll hear it at one point and
I would say mine is where people kind of sing what they're wearing. So it'd be like black sweater and a little silver hoop, black sweater and a little silver hoop. And I've seen
It's
some celebrities jump on that, and it's such a fun trend.
Oh
so
my God.
good.
I love that one. I saw like Disney characters doing that one in a video, and I was like, that's so funny. Like, it's just
So
great.
good. Last question for you all. If you have a brand that comes to mind, a brand you think is doing it right, inside higher ed or outside higher ed, who do you think is doing it right?
this is a basic answer, but Duolingo. I just feel like consistently they're getting on all of the trends. And I feel like they've even made joking videos about this where they're like, this did not get approved by my manager or the correct like social media channels because of how fast they move on things. And I think it's so authentic, such a peek behind the curtain, so unhinged, and really aligns with Gen Z. I think they've gotten a lot of love over the years even. So
I don't know if y'all have seen the like car dealership. They will like compile a video of like someone falling, and that video will have gotten like millions and millions of views. And then they'll clip it to like right when the person falls, it shows them at the car dealership. And they're like, come on down to, or like someone will get sprayed with like a water gun. And then it'll just show them like covered in water. And they're like, we got, we can get you dry here at Nissan, whatever.
Love
And
that.
that's so funny.
Yeah,
Incredible.
I love those. There's like a similar version of that with like a trust fall too, where they like let the person fall and then they're like, don't let your friends not trust you or something like that. Like there's those trends too, where it's like, well, we have your back, and it's like a law firm. I'm like, dang,
So
okay,
good.
gotta be dramatic.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. Seriously, a huge thanks. And thanks to all those listening. If there are other trends that would be helpful for us to break down, especially from a higher ed or market enrollment marketing perspective, let us know. We'd love to get this group back together and keep this conversation going. And of course, if you are interested in learning more about Vision Point marketing or how we can best support you with one of our brand enrollment marketing or CRM solutions, please check out visionpointmarketing.com. Thanks, everyone.